When I was 12, my folks shipped me off to live with my uncle, hoping to get rid of the spare twin. Years after that, they were genuinely hurt when they met my own family. When I turned 12, my folks sent me to stay with my uncle, my dad's older brother, in the rural area because they were over the idea of looking after me. They figured I was a problem and they'd rather just raise my twin sister, whom they thought was far more competent than I was. I'll admit it. She was a whole lot smarter than I was. Sadly, I couldn't keep pace with her. I was largely just average, but in a family filled with smart people, just being average wasn't enough. Both of my parents were doctors and they had decided that my sister and I would follow in their footsteps. But honestly, I never really cared much for studying. I was much more drawn to creative pursuits. That was what I really envisioned myself doing. They piled a ton of pressure on me and I wasn't doing well in school. It didn't help matters that my folks never even tried to motivate me. All they did was insult me and always measure me up against my sister. My twin sister was accustomed to that kind of treatment from a young age, however it only got worse over time, and it became really hard for me to concentrate on anything. By the time I got to high school, at age 12, I was struggling so much that I was failing most of my classes. Even though I put in the effort, I wasn't able to improve my grades. My instructors were always frustrated with me because they had no idea what my life was like when I wasn't at school. They just assumed I was lacking motivation. They figured I wasn't putting in the effort to better myself. Others at school always measured me against my incredibly smart twin, who was succeeding far more than I was. I would shed tears every single evening before bed because every single day my parents would tell my sister how much they adored her, while also making sure I understood how much I let them down and needed to get better. Things reached a boiling point one evening. During dinner, they started in on me once more about my grades. I completely lost it, and the punishment lasted for the next 2 weeks. That's when I made the decision to leave home, even though I had absolutely no idea where to go. Unsurprisingly, I didn't get very far and only made it to the park around the corner where I sat by myself, feeling utterly miserable and afraid in the darkness. They discovered me there around 5 in the morning and were forced to call the authorities to get me. After returning me home, it was that day they decided I would live with my uncle in the rural area, where I could grow up with him and his family. When my folks revealed that they were sending me to live with my uncle and his family, I practically pleaded with them over and over to change their minds. I promised that I would do better, never disappoint them again, and that I wouldn't attempt to run off. However, they didn't listen to anything I said. They stated that I had failed them and they couldn't handle it anymore. My folks had another child to look after, and honestly, they couldn't dedicate all their effort to someone who'd continually demonstrated their inadequacy. Honestly, I didn't think it was true. Most of their time was spent showering my sister with compliments, hardly giving me a second thought unless they were making fun of me for my poor performance in school. Regardless, I kept pleading with them, and more than anything, I didn't want to be separated from my sister. She was truly the only person in that family who treated me with kindness. Yet they didn't pay any attention to my pleas, and they did what they felt they had to do. They made me say farewell to my sister, and they wouldn't even let her go with me to my uncle's residence. After I arrived, I truly couldn't stop weeping for the next several weeks, and all I desired was to return to my house. I kept trying to get in touch with my mom and dad. Nonetheless, my uncle and aunt were incredibly nice and understanding throughout that period since they seemed to grasp what I was going through. However, my parents never returned my calls and they simply ignored me. A handful of weeks passed and I ultimately decided to accept what was happening and come to terms with the situation. I continued to maintain contact with my sister. She was the only one who communicated with me, but it needed to happen in secrecy since I didn't possess my own telephone. I had to phone her using the house phone at my uncle's place whenever my aunt and uncle weren't around. Social media was beginning to gain traction at that time, and thankfully she occasionally used the computer to chat with me. Whenever she signaled that things were clear, I'd call her and we could finally have a conversation. My sister and I stayed connected, cherishing our bond, which will always remain strong. She kept me informed about everything going on with her and mom and dad throughout the past decade. She also mentioned that our parents were going to try to reach out to me a few weeks back, giving me some time to mentally prepare for that moment. It's been a full 10 years since I'd spoken to my parents at all. In the beginning, it was because they wouldn't try to contact me or even communicate with me after leaving me at my uncle's place. After being at my uncle's house for a couple of years, it was me who just wasn't interested in rekindling a relationship. They'd deserted me, and in my mind that was that. Truthfully, once I moved in with my aunt and uncle, my life got a lot better. They didn't put the same kind of stress on me that my parents did, and my schoolwork improved. I was still just okay in my studies, not the exceptional student my sister always was, but at least I wasn't failing all my classes. My uncle and aunt also let me get involved in other things like school plays and sports, which my parents wouldn't allow because they thought it would hurt my grades. I was really enjoying life and I was really happy with them. When I was living with my parents, they wouldn't let me talk to boys either because they believed it would be a distraction. Fortunately, my uncle and aunt didn't have those silly rules and let me talk to whoever I wanted. I enjoyed having friends over without any pressure. In fact, that's the way I first encountered my husband, and we've been a couple ever since. For the past 6 years, we've been a couple. We became a couple during high school, and we've essentially been together continuously since then. We even attended the same university. Just last year, I got my college diploma, and my husband did the same a week later. Although they don't live nearby, we see them quite often, and they come to see our son as well. I'm currently taking time off work because I'm on maternity leave, so I don't have to return to my job for another few weeks. Over the past few years, my sister and I have been open with each other. After she turned 18, she didn't feel like she should hide our connection from our parents anymore. There was nothing they could really do to prevent it. She was my maid of honor, plus she's also my son's godmother. When she came to see us just last week, she told me that our parents were making plans to get in touch with me. Because they were out of touch with almost everyone once they abandoned me, they didn't know that I got married or that I had a baby. That was a really heartless thing they did, so they were totally in the dark about my life. My sister didn't feel that she needed to give them any information about me, so she didn't tell them anything, even when they asked. After a decade, they finally seemed to feel some guilt about what they had done so long ago, and they were ready to try to contact me. She thought it was her responsibility to let me know so I could make my own choice. Honestly, I wasn't shocked when they contacted me, asking if they could come over a couple of days after my sister left. My folks actually contacted me via social media, wanting to come over. It wasn't like they said, sorry, or anything, just a plain message, both of them asking if a visit was possible, that was all. Honestly, I was a bit let down by that message because I was really hoping at the very least for an apology for all the things they did to me back then. So for quite a while I was really bothered and I considered just ignoring the whole message. But then a different idea came to me. I thought I would have them come over to my place and sort of display my life now, because things are great for me, and I figured showing them how well I was doing without them might be a good thing to do. So I sent them my address and told them I'd have dinner on the weekend. I also asked my uncle, my aunt, and my sister to come, too, and obviously, my husband and my son were going to be there since dinner was at my place that day. I didn't give my uncle and aunt the heads up that my parents would be there, so everybody was pretty shocked when they showed up at my house last weekend. It was 3 days ago, and honestly, I'm still not sure if I handled it correctly or not. Anyway, after everyone was here, things felt super uncomfortable because, of course, I hadn't seen my parents in a decade, and everyone in the family had distanced themselves from them. That included my uncle and aunt, since they didn't want anything to do with my parents either. My folks' justification for that plan was that they vowed not only to provide for me financially while I resided with my uncle, but also to maintain communication, ensuring I wouldn't feel isolated and that my emotional well-being was taken care of. But truthfully, they only kept half of their word. While they consistently sent money each month, they never bothered to get in touch, and they seemed quite relieved to be rid of me. That arrangement wasn't what my uncle had initially agreed upon, and he felt disappointed because my parents were essentially deserting me emotionally. Yet he was accepting of it. He had no problem taking care of me, so he was the one who stuck up for me and let the rest of the family know what my father was doing. Everybody else distanced themselves from my father because of that, which generated a lot of bad feelings between them, but my dad kept sending cash until I reached adulthood. After that milestone, there was absolutely no communication between them. We just exchanged greetings and then it was time for dinner. Before we dug in, I decided to say a few words. As if the situation wasn't strained enough, I thought I'd crank up the awkwardness because I wanted my parents to experience some remorse and feel bad about themselves. So I stood up and began a speech about how lovely the last 10 years of my existence had been when contrasted with the initial 12. I presented it as though it was a speech dedicated to my uncle and aunt because, honestly, they had done so much for me during those past 10 years, and I seriously doubt I would have progressed in life as I have without their support. I expressed my gratitude to my husband as he'd been by my side the whole time, and to my sister because she never lost faith in me no matter the circumstances. In my speech, I made a conscious decision to exclude my parents as I didn't feel they deserved my thanks. This was clear to them as throughout my entire speech, they kept their gaze fixed downward and remained completely silent. Once I wrapped up speaking, I decided to press the issue further and directed my attention toward my parents, informing them that I was now prepared to introduce them to my new family. They looked utterly shocked when I revealed this because I really don't believe they anticipated that kind of statement from me. The moment I said this was my new family, my mother broke down in tears and practically bolted out of the room. Following their departure, we shared a really uncomfortable and silent meal. Nobody stayed around for dessert, and I was secretly relieved because things felt incredibly tense. While I didn't have a fondness for my parents, I can't shake the feeling that my actions weren't completely justified. I haven't had a chance to speak with my uncle and aunt yet, however. Both my sister and my husband believe I went a tad too far and perhaps shouldn't have responded to my parents' texts at all if I had no interest in communicating with them. Ultimately, that kind of public shamming felt totally uncalled for. Am I in the wrong for inviting my parents to dinner and then causing them public humiliation? Regarding an update, so far the opinions I've read on the comments section have been pretty mixed on whether I should offer my parents an apology, but everybody is in agreement that I definitely should talk to my uncle and aunt. Because the matter of my parents is still unresolved, I decided to reach out to my uncle today. It's been a whole week since that family dinner I put together and we really hadn't chatted much. We were all occupied in the past few days between my schedule and theirs. I also suspected some lingering discomfort, which made us keep our communication to a minimum to prevent things from becoming even stranger. Today I took the initiative and gave my uncle a call, and before he could even respond, I told him how truly sorry I was for bringing my parents to that dinner without even giving them a heads up. He admitted he was a little taken aback that I'd done that, but he eventually let it go. He just hadn't contacted me because he was unsure about how I was doing after that evening since I appeared pretty upset. He agreed that the atmosphere had been incredibly strained that day, but he said it was all in the past and not worth dwelling on. Afterwards, I gave my aunt a call and extended my apologies to her as well. Her reaction was pretty much the same. Now that I've said I'm sorry to both of them and we've cleared the air, I don't feel so bad anymore. As for my parents, I don't feel like I owe them an apology. After everything I experienced growing up, I honestly don't believe anyone would fault me for how I acted. They still haven't offered me an apology, so I don't see why I should offer one to them. I discussed this situation with my spouse as well because he'd suggested I say I was sorry to them. I made it clear that even though my behavior at the dinner wasn't right, their past treatment of me was also not okay. He appeared to grasp my viewpoint, so he didn't press the issue. I shared the same sentiment with my sister, and she was a little unsure at first, but then she mentioned that, ultimately, it was my call. I was the one who had been mistreated, so my course of action would be reasonable. She also hasn't been able to reach our parents lately. They've been unusually silent. I suppose they're just avoiding the situation for the time being. I'm certain they'll contact me again eventually, and they'll likely expect an apology or attempt to create some conflict. Just to clear something up, my sister isn't trying to be diplomatic by maintaining a good relationship with our parents. Even if she is, I'm fine with it. It shouldn't become a big problem in the comments, which I've observed. She understands that what they did to me was completely wrong, but she was also very young at the time. It's not like she could have stood up for or defended me back then. She was against it back then, but we were so little that what we thought really didn't count, so there was nothing she could have done. She did the best she could, keeping in contact with me, so that's perfectly acceptable. She still keeps in touch with our parents because they're aging and she feels obligated to stay connected. She wouldn't want to leave them as that would bring feelings of guilt. That's really the whole story. It's not some complicated situation, so I would prefer it if you didn't try to make accusations against her. It's really unwarranted. We have a great deal of affection for each other, so we don't think the things people are saying about her are fair. Now, regarding the events that transpired, as I mentioned previously, I pretty much figured my parents in the end wouldn't just let everything go and react in a friendly manner to my actions. They're simply not the kind of people who will easily brush something off. Consequently, I'd anticipated some type of comeback from them. It finally occurred today, a little over a week after the dinner I put together. They opted to publicize the entire situation and actually put everything on their social media. I have to admit, it took me by surprise because they aren't all that active on social media in general. However, just for this specific issue, they chose to make a post about it. Just like I predicted, it was a very biased post, only focusing on their hurt feelings, without mentioning any of the things they've done previously. Honestly, I wouldn't have been bothered by the post if it were aimed at any of our family members, as nobody in my family is fond of my parents given how they've treated me and others in the past. They were incredibly shrewd about the whole thing. They chose to include my colleagues and even my spouse, despite the fact that he had nothing to do with the whole mess. My workmates clearly weren't in the know about my backstory with my folks or our strained relationship, so they were all taken aback when they were included in that update, and my phone immediately began to buzz with notifications. Because I'm on maternity leave, I obviously had no clue what they'd put up there since I'm not working, and I'm not on social media all that much because I'm usually consumed with my baby. Once my friends started reaching out, instructing me to see what happened, I was stunned. I couldn't figure out how to respond since this wasn't at all what I had predicted. I strongly suspected they'd been monitoring my coworkers' social media profiles as I had tons of photos with them and had tagged them. That's likely what they had occupied themselves with the past week, stalking, trying to deduce my workplace friendships so they could destroy my good name. In any case, I saw that post and was taken aback for a short time, but then I made up my mind to post a response and explain the truth. I had no reason to cover anything up. I was the one being wronged, so what went down at that dinner was unreasonable. Because of this, I wrote about the entire incident, how they abandoned me at my uncle's house all those years ago, and then refused to stay in contact with me after that point. Even when they did reach out, there wasn't a word of remorse. After I got back home, the apologies were still absent. If they had expressed some regret, maybe I would have thought about taking back what I said, but I truly believe I wasn't in the wrong. I reiterated that same point to my colleagues who were also mentioned in the original post. I felt bad, so I apologized to them for my folks' actions since there was no need to involve them in our squabble. My parents acting up like that was absurd. Frankly, I'm pretty annoyed because they could have just talked to me directly and kept it simple, but pulling my coworkers into it was a low blow and completely out of line. I've been sitting here waiting for my husband to get back. I didn't want to bother him at work today as he mentioned having a crucial meeting with a client. I otherwise would have called him up and shared everything. Honestly though, this is just some silly drama and I can deal with it myself. I already spoke to my sister, and she also believes our parents are acting completely bonkers at the moment. They probably just couldn't stand the disrespect anymore and totally lost their cool, and that's what I think happened. But even so, there's no excuse for this kind of conduct. I haven't even told any of my aunts or uncles about it because I know they'll have some very strong opinions, and I don't want to burden them right now since they are swamped at work. Update 3. A few hours have gone by since I last posted an update. It's now 8 in the evening. Here's where I am at the moment, and everyone I know is here with me. My aunt and uncle, along with my sister and my spouse, just got home from their jobs. We're all trying to figure out the best way to manage this whole mess. I'm really trying to avoid going to a lawyer, which a lot of you recommended, because I just don't have the bandwidth right now to submit a formal request and then manage the whole process. Frankly, it's not essential. I'd prefer to deal with this myself and keep lawyers out of it for as long as I can possibly manage. Obviously, if they refuse to take down the thing they posted, then maybe I will have to speak with a lawyer and file a defamation suit or whatever legal action is necessary. But until then, we're putting every effort into getting it removed. So far, everybody has sent them texts requesting that they take it down, but they haven't paid any attention to what we've sent. They haven't even replied to our messages. I'm completely lost as to what they're thinking. They didn't even bother to delete my comment, so at least everyone who looks at that post will know the facts. A whole bunch of people have already seen it, and it's getting a lot of attention for some reason, which isn't good for me because I don't come off well in that post. Beyond just my colleagues who were tagged, a few people I know saw it and they've already started asking me about it. I'm not sure how it's even showing up in their feed, probably because I was also tagged in the post too. I already got rid of the tag, but it's still there in people's feeds. I figured there was probably a technical issue with the application, yet it's not a pleasant experience for me at all. I'm constantly being asked about it, and I'm so done with responding. They could just read my previous note and understand, but for some reason they keep reaching out to me, needing to ask me the same questions repeatedly. It's getting really frustrating, and I just wish it would stop. Truthfully, I'm just hoping and praying that I don't get a call from human resources, because that could be very detrimental. I absolutely don't want to damage my standing at work because of my family, so up until this moment, my relatives and I are still seeking a solution to have them remove it, yet they're ignoring us. My sister said that tomorrow she's planning to visit my parents and request that they take it down in person. Perhaps that will work. If they still refuse, we'll have no option but to take legal action. I really hope it doesn't come to that, as it will be a huge burden for me. At this point, I just want to spend quality time with my son. That's the entire purpose of my maternity leave, not to be stressed about their ridiculous actions. What they did was really unsettling, but honestly, it's the smallest thing I'm worried about right now. In any event, she explained to me that she'd had a lengthy conversation with them, and they said they'd be happy to delete the thing, but only if I said I was sorry first. I instantly informed my sister that wasn't going to fly because I hadn't done anything incorrect, and I'm staying firm on that. Luckily, she understood I wasn't going to apologize, so she informed them it was a moot point and I wasn't going to feign an apology for something I didn't even do. They could save their effort and just remove the post, or otherwise I'd pursue legal action, which wouldn't turn out well for them. That conversation went on for close to 60 minutes, and in the finish, they agreed to take the post down and call it quits. However, they also had my sister tell me that they were cutting me out of their lives and the inheritance too. Frankly, I couldn't care less about any of that stuff. I just want that post taken down. They can keep that inheritance. It means absolutely nothing to me. My spouse and I are succeeding wonderfully in our jobs, and we know we'll be okay. At least I don't have to rely on them for any financial help. My sister said she relayed that same sentiment to them, so at least they're clear on my feelings. Now that this is done, I'm going to spend the rest of my maternity leave with my baby and enjoy it before I have to go back to working. My folks took down the original thing because it made them look bad after everyone else in our family discovered what happened. Like I said, the rest of my relatives stopped having contact with them due to what they did to me. Consequently, when they saw the post, they took my side and went after my parents. Some people commented on the post and others referenced it to make their own. I'd love to say I enjoyed how things played out, though all I really wanted was for them to just quit discussing me. On the plus side, my parents did delete the initial post, plus I talked to my other family members and they removed their posts as well. In any case, I expressed my gratitude to them for supporting me. That undoubtedly meant a great deal to me. Growing up without the attention of a parent can mess you up mentally, so it feels good to know people care.